There we go. He did it right. Good job. Hey, everybody. How are you? Paul, you're here. Great.
That's
All
all I
right.
care about.
If Paul's here, I think we can get started. Ted, I know you did a talk about quality content last week and haven't been able to see it, but today I saw that there was a post from John Mueller about quality content. Did you end up reading that by any chance, or should I pull out some gems there?
I read some of it. The main thing I was looking for was his definition of quality, which he gave us. And it turns out what he's calling quality, we in the testing community call factor diversity. And so when he says quality in that way, it's not what most people think quality is. It's a very different beast.
Well, and it's interesting because he does mention, he talks about in there, I'm not just going to look at that copy. And I think that it's important for people to recognize and understand that they're looking literally at everything. It's diversification on that page. It's multimedia. And I know that there's people out there right now selling SOPs for content creation. And the ones that I see that have effective processes are not just focusing on rewritten text. They're actually automating some of the video creation and automating some of that with AI, right? They're doing imagery, they're creating images, they're creating video, and they're building a solid piece of content. Now, we can get into the argument of can I put out crap with that? And is it still quality? Or does it have to be like pristine and beautiful, right?
There's a lot of schools of thought. And the first thing people need to understand is that the rhinoplasty plano paint SEO by numbers trick, it still works. Those pages still rank top for their terms. To this day, nothing's changed. So we know that Google isn't punishing paint by numbers SEO. And then on top of that, we have to look at the other things that we see working. And so one of the things we see working is just the traditional model of how document indexing has worked since the late 70s. Like, not a lot of that has changed. TF-IDF, keyword density, number of keyword matches, in specific zones of the page that matter more than other zones of the page. All those recipes still work today.
And I think it's important to understand that there's always going to have to be weight on something. It doesn't matter. There's going to have to be a process or a system or something that can be found and used to offer additional benefit to a page. And I think it's important to understand that going into what we're going to talk about today, because I think a lot of the volatility, at least this is how I see it, and I know that you've been using this software specifically a lot more than I have. I've run it a few times when I want to see and cross-check with some of the stuff I'm doing. When we get into things like quality content, when we get into things like paint by numbers, this or that, I think that's where we really start to see where people have issues with things like the volatility of their SERPs and things. Because let's take evergreen content, for example. I got in a big argument with someone that does very well in the publishing space and in the community space, that there is no such thing as evergreen content, but there are evergreen topics. And that's how I feel. There are topics that continue to stay around, and there might be a concept or a framework of an article that can always be there. But my argument is, and you tell me if I'm wrong, if I have a piece of content that I throw up, I'm pretty sure in a year or two I can go to you and you can take me out in the SERPs if I don't come back and update my content or tune or optimize my content. And that is the way I look at it. Go ahead.
There's a number of things to that. You're right, but there's a variety of reasons why you're right. So you have to understand that you're making moves on your content. You're doing things to adjust your rank position, and your competitors are also making moves. So if you think your job's done, just give it some time, and somebody's going to want the space you're in. Yep. And Google is also changing the rules of the game. So there's no way that you can call SEO done. It's always going to be something that you need to fix and maintain. Otherwise, you'll probably gradually degrade. The exception to that is if you have an absolute mountain of authority and people can't compete with you on that authority, then you just kind of win until somebody can, apply that amount of resources to compete. The other thing, going back a step to the paint by numbers SEO, the rhinoplasty plano, let's rank some lorem ipsum content with the keyword math that makes it work. A lot of people view that as black hat, but what I would suggest is that you can use that black hat technique to create white hat quality content.
Yes.
And the way that you do that, the way that you apply those techniques is you use the various measurement tools out in the world. A lot of them do that. And you figure out what keyword density you need, what entities you need, what word counts you need. And you can do all that in the paint by numbers, gibberish bullshit text and get it to the point where it ranks. And then what you have in that bullshit text is you have the specification of the true white hat text you need to make. You know all the words, all the frequencies, all the entities, all the word count. It's kind of like a working model of what you need to build in a real long form piece of content. And so I often tell people that if you're black hat, you can just do all your SEO in a hidden div and it works, and it does. And that's the rhinoplasty plano thing. But you could also, figure out the keyword math that helps you rank and then just use that as the spec to then write the skyscraper content to that specification.
Well, and it's one of the things we talked about at the event this year, and I know that Susky is talking about it at Surfer and stuff too, is you said, lorem ipsum, but you can also look at this as like taking real content or AI content or just copying and curating content with the right topical structure. And really, it doesn't matter what you populate the copy with, as long as you're doing the page and creating the page correctly and hitting the points correctly. I mean, that's how I see AI content and things like topical grouping without deep analysis is a quick way to get things up, to get visibility, and then you start to tune it. And the point is tuning going forward. And so that leads me into, so tuning going forward. I know I have ways I decide when I want to do things to my site. They're probably not the way anyone else does it, but it ties a lot into volatility for me. And I'm interested in the audience, if anyone actually tracks volatility right now, if they track what's going on in their SERPs. I think it's a mistake if you're not collecting data on the people that are in the SERPs with you. But if you guys have anything to throw out there, throw it out there. But Ted, I think it's important for people to start seeing what can happen in the SERPs and kind of what is affecting it. And I know you have more data on this than I do. So I think I want to let you just kind of run with what you have, and we'll kind of jump in when we have questions. And I might have questions for you.
Okay. So first, I'm going to describe, what the volatility is. And so when we talk about volatility, we're talking about your rank tracker one day saying you're number 4 and the next day saying you're number 12, and then the next day it says you're number 7. And you're looking at those fluctuations and you're not changing your page. And, it might even be the case that your competitors aren't changing their pages. So why the hell are the rankings moving around? And so it turns out there's a number of reasons why the rankings are moving around. So last year we started doing research, and this year we actually have software that measures and diagnoses various issues in the volatility. And so that's what this SEO volatility software is. It's software for Macs and PCs, and it does the measurements. So the way it works is you put in a keyword and you state how many samples you want. That's how many times we're going to search for the keyword in quick succession. So usually in under a minute or two, we're going to get the search results that many times from Google. So when you do that, most people think that it's relatively static. My rank tracker said I'm a 7, so I'm always a 7. Turns out you're not. Your rankings can go, 7, 7, 9.
I thought I was a 7, then a girl told me I was a solid 4. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, same thing. Like, what the hell's going on?
Yeah. Craig is actually still ill. He is behind the scenes right now. He didn't want to put his shirt on, so he's managing comments right now.
He didn't want me to get too excited on one of these things, so
yeah.
And so when we produce a report, and we'll zoom in on these, don't try to read them. You can see like the ranking data we have here is just a list of rankings that we got in quick succession. And then we're plotting the average rank of things, and we're describing statistically what's going on with the rankings. And you can see that red and pink there in the charts. That's upward and downward position testing that Google is doing on those pages. And so let me dive in a little closer. Okay, so we talk about rankings as a probability. The whole SEO industry is out there using rank trackers going, my page is number 7. Well, it turns out that that's a surefire way to get your clients and employers frustrated. And most SEOs who have been in the business a long time have lost clients or been fired simply by going to their client and saying, hey, today we're number 7. The client goes and checks and says, what the hell do you know? We're, number 16. That's even worse than where we were. And that's typically the camel that, or the straw that breaks the camel's back, and you lose your job. And it sucks, because what happened there wasn't your fault. It's just this volatility in the rankings. So what we want to do is we want to be able to describe the rankings in a way that you could place an odds bet on what somebody else is going to see when they try to look it up. And so we have this notation that we use. And the first thing we look at is time sharing. So what percentage of the keyword searches for this term do you appear in? And so that's the most critical thing. So
Ted, does that means basically if the time sharing is like that, that means 50% of the time you're not even in the results.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's hugely important, because that means that your ranking is very weak. So not all number 7 rankings are equal. Some number 7 rankings are solid as fuck, and other number 7 rankings
just ain't nothing.
So time sharing is definitely critical to understand, and that's why it's the first thing we look at, and you want that to be 100%. And then position testing is this next block. So it's the most common ranking you had out of the samples. So 40% of the time at number 19. And ideally, we'd want to see you at 100% at your best ranking possible. And then, of course, we need to manage the worst case scenario, because that's the thing that gets you fired. Worst case 21. So when I go to the client and I say, hey, you're appearing in half the searches, and when you do appear, 40% of the time you're at number 19 with a worst case of 21, the client knows it's a probability. They know they need to try the search a few times to see what you're saying. And that makes all the difference. When you communicate the ranking to the client, you want to make sure that you know what you're talking about and you predict what they're going to see.
I think what's interesting when we talk about time sharing, I wanted to get to, I know you've heard me talk about like universal search. And so I look at their past history where they purchased, DoubleClick. That's when I stopped using DoubleClick, is when they purchased it. And then went back to it when it came into the into the system, into Google Ads and all that. And so the day parting and the day parting in there, everything. And then with the fact that the new director of search actually has written books on recommendation engines and collaborative filtering, and we know that they have access to certain data. And I've heard them in some of their office hour, podcasts talking about the way they deliver different pieces of content into the main organic SERP is based on a score that's assigned to a piece of content. So when I see time sharing, and I know that, I start thinking about the kind of data that they might be using there. And so I don't know. I mean, do you think there's anything to the connection into AdWords there with the time sharing that you're seeing? I mean, and we can go on, and we don't have to go on this rabbit hole, but I want to throw that out there for you to think about, and we can get into it later after this if you want.
I think there are similarities, and I think it's in the processes and Google's need to test things to figure out where they should rank. And it's in that testing that a lot of these behaviors occur. And we'll go into some examples.
It's interesting because if you think about it, time sharing, if we have similar websites, but they have traditional history of performing better at different times of the day and they're tracking something like that, then it might make sense for them to split that ranking, right? Not saying that's what they're doing, but that's kind of where my head starts to go with it. But yeah, go on, man.
Okay. The thing I want you to really pay attention the most here too is the ranking data. So in this case, we got 10 rankings as quickly as possible in under a minute, and just look at how volatile they are. So in under a minute, they have these fluctuations: 16, 19, 15, 15, 19, 19, 17, 17, 19, 21. So when you use a traditional rank tracker and get your rankings at one point in time during the day, you're just kind of rolling the dice on one of these values. You can literally run the rank tracker again and try to re-roll a better value if you want it. And that's why you need to do sampling, because the actual descriptor of what's going on with your page is the average ranking, not just one of these samples. And the other thing to note is this red and green. So this is an actual bar chart where we're showing you where your samples are plotting out. And we can see that your most common rank position is at the dividing line, and Google is doing some upward testing and some downward testing. And we suspect that if you're not careful with your CTR manipulation and you click on the downward testing ones, you might be sending Google a signal that you perform just as well at a lower spot.
Yeah, and that's what I mean when I come to the day parting and the ad server technology, is that directly. The way that they are, it just makes a lot of sense from what I've seen for the last, I don't know now, since they purchased, it's been 8 years, 6 years. It's interesting. Yeah.
All right, so this is the fundamental thing that the software is doing, and it turns out that we can diagnose a whole number of volatility problems using this tech. So the first one I want to describe is title variance and description variance. And so when people hear title variance, they instantly go to Google's title rewriting, because that's the hot topic. While that is part of what I'm talking about, it's not the thing I'm talking about. When we talk about title variance, we're talking about when Google has a tough choice between 2 or more titles it can use for the page, and they actually start split testing in the search results. Now, 1 or more of those split test titles could be rewritten, but it's what we're actually reporting here is the split testing, not the rewriting. And so we can see these X's in the data. That means that it didn't appear in those searches. So we can see that the first 2 were one title, but not the other. And then the third was the other title, but not the first. And then the rest were, this one. So we can actually see that in the appearance rate, we're in 100% of searches if you combine both titles, but 10% of the time it's using this first one. We can also see that we have an average ranking of 23.9, and that this 29 that we're getting because of the title variance and description variance is dragging down our average ranking. We normally do pretty well, and we can see that the worst performing title is this first one, and the worst performing description is this second one. And so if we can eliminate the split testing that Google is doing, we could drive up our average ranking a little bit and stabilize our rankings. They'll be less volatile. And we can actually solve these things.
It's actually very powerful to know that, especially when you couple that with the knowledge of how to stop them from rewriting you constantly in a manner that's not effective for you. So,
yep. And so I like to look at these problems individually, because each zone that's contributing to volatility kind of has its own fixes and best practices. So when we look at how to fix title variance, this usually happens when you have a change in your title and Google is trying to figure out which one was better, the old
really
one.
quick, Ted, I've got questions that I'm seeing that are these, is this part of Quora? This is a different software than Quora. It's SEOvolatility.com, isn't it?
Correct.
Okay.
And so what we see is that Google will often compare a new title versus an old title. It might also compare different title options from the page and off page. So there are other sources from that title rewriting where Google might pick a title from a heading or a sentence or from your backlink anchors or from your image alts. And so all of these things could be sources of the titles that Google is split testing. And so when we go to tune it, we want to figure out which one is most stable, which one ranks the best, and where is it drawing from, so that we can tune those zones appropriately to regain control of where the title's coming from. So ideally, we could retune where this text is coming from in a way that we're controlling it with our title tag again. One of the main problems we see oftentimes is that it'll come from like a heading. And if it's like an e-com site, it'll be like a category page, and the heading will describe the number of products. And as products go in and out of stock, that number changes. And so having dynamic text like that in these zones frequently causes this title variance. So one of the things we could do to solve it in those cases is to avoid dynamic text in the places where Google is trying to draw that title text from. We've also noticed that in the current climate, Google appears to have a preference for sentence-like titles. They want the titles to be very different. So the days of everything being keyword hyphen brand seem to be waning a bit in strength. So if you're in a place where you're getting volatility and you're doing the keyword hyphen brand title, you may want to bring a question or a statement, something more verbose into that zone.
You know, what's interesting that you say this, I am seeing a trend with lost question queries for sites that are actually not addressing this right now in a lot of campaigns that I'm pulling in from the API that we monitor with our local stuff, actually, which is very interesting to say that. I'm going to ask you something later, so go on.
Yeah, so as you can see up here, I had a keyword hyphen brand scenario going on, and it actually only ranked 10% of the time, so it was time sharing, and it ranked poorly. And when I turned it into a longer, more verbose title, got the more stable rankings. And so the other thing you want to do is you just want to keep tuning it until you regain control of the title text with your title tag. It's totally doable. And avoid titles that look too similar to already ranking pages. So yeah, the question thing, if it's a common question,
Yeah.
Somebody's going to win it, and if you don't have the page rank to back it up, it's probably not going to be you. You need a unique title to also rank side by side with it. So on the description variance, it's similar but a little different. First of all, you need to tune your meta description tag. So many people out there believe that they don't need to even put it on the page, and all they're doing is adding volatility. And I've seen it, like business.com is a culprit. They have like a 250,000, 500,000 pages where they're often not setting the meta description, and all their pages are going up 6, down 6 all the time because they're not tuning for their target keyword. Now, granted, we live in a world where a page can rank for hundreds of keywords. At least tune it for the most important keyword for the page.
So and I would even say keep that in mind, but I know that when we get to a certain point in our visibility, we have to start tweaking it for CTR as well to actually to continue. So
but the CTR doesn't work unless it appears.
Well, that's my point. Exactly. Yeah. You have to start paying attention to it. There is a point where if you're not paying attention to it, it's just going to be detrimental.
Yeah. So the vital skill set is to regain control of it. Then you can start to change it in ways that help CTR.
100%.
And the zones that the description text come from, there's generally fewer. They can pull from the title and headings and sentences on the content. I don't see much off page in the description. It might be out there in rare cases, but it's hard to find if it is. And again, avoid dynamic text. Like oftentimes the thing that we see split testing is in this area is like a publish date. And Google has a surprisingly long memory. We've seen Google split testing on a publish date in the description, going back 4 years and 1 day apart. So you'd see the publish date 4 years ago, 1 day apart between the two descriptions. That's a long memory, and Google's been split testing that for 4 years. That's 4 years of volatility in the rankings. And in my own website's case, when I had this problem, one was ranking at an average rank at 23, and the other's ranking at 29. Nothing else is changing on the page. This is all happening in a minute, and the rankings are fluctuating based on the split test Google is presenting.
So I hope people are picking up on the fact that you could be really being detrimental to yourself if you're not doing certain things when you're running any sort of manipulation of CTR. There are things that need to be taken into consideration that should be hinted at right here with everything that we're talking about. There's processes that should be in place before you just run out there and solidify a negativity or negative aspect for Google on your website. So,
yeah, one thing I forgot to mention, let me go back here to the title variance.
Real quick question. This is a good one Adam Poland had, and if Craig sees it, pull it up. When Google rewrites title tags and meta descriptions, is it worth it sticking with what they change it to? Or should we try to should we try to get them to actually like what we want for a CTR basis? Like, how should we look at this, Ted?
Well, here's the first thing. Most SEOs think that when Google is split testing, they're going to evaluate the options and pick the one that works best for the content. And the sad fact is, most of the time that's not true. Most of the time, the one Google settles on is the worst ranking of the two. So if you think Google's going to do right by you by making the decision after their split testing, you're sadly mistaken most of the time.
Well, I could even argue the fact that maybe if you're actually manipulating CTR and you're not being smart about it, you're helping Google make the bad decision.
Yeah, so the first thing is which one performs well, and you have two pieces of data to work with. You have the average rank position, And you also have how stable is it? Is it 90% or is it 10%? And so you may want to have the better ranking version on a more stable page. And so you're going to have to consider, what is the thing that's most important, that the ranking or the stability, and ideally both. So in this case, I just want the unstable one to die. I don't want the 10% of the time. I want the higher ranking 100% of the time.
Exactly.
Oh, and my point on the title tag, another very common cause of this type of split testing and volatility is when you inconsistently manage your brand. I've seen this on Sears quite a bit, where Sears has Sears Incorporated or just Sears or Sears.com or Sears.com with the lowercase s. All that inconsistency in how they present their brand confuses Google when Google's adding brand to the titles. And so they'll split test all the different brand incarnations. So if you aren't super strict about how you present brands, I guarantee you're going to eventually cause this volatility on your site. So you need to be strict about your brand presentation.
We were in a situation where we were helping someone in a pretty freaking tough market move forward and optimize. They just kept like, but everyone else in the market's doing their titles this way, or they're doing their descriptions this way, and we're just like, no, just keep doing it. And I think people miss out. They miss out on the fact is just because what they're seeing in their market is what's working right then doesn't mean it's what's going to work as data is collected, because we pay a lot of attention to queries that exist but aren't really optimized for. Once we get in there first and we optimize first, that's how we build authority math. We're not going to get in that conversation right now, but you know what I'm talking about. And when you get in there, you can see people come in, they start doing it the way they're used to, but you know what is going to work by data that you have collected in the past. And so having this kind of information for people available, really pay attention to this, because not only is your title important for maintaining a high CTR as you move down the line and you have solid ranking, but that description as well. You have to be able to control what that is, or else your CTR will suffer. Everything emerges. You start to have issues and you derank, and that's where volatility comes back in. So it's a very big balancing act, I think, man. And it's great that you're bringing this to the forefront. And not enough people talk about volatility.
Yeah, and the funny thing about all these volatility problems is I was able to fix them in about a day. Like when you act on these issues, Google tends to respond pretty quickly, as long as it's not during a massive update.
Exactly.
In normal conditions, fixing these things is a 24 to 48 hour problem.
That's right.
So finishing up description variance, just keep tuning it like the other one until you regain control of what's presented in your meta description tag. The name of the game here is SEOs, is we want to control the situation. So if it's coming from random places you're not picking, you're not in control. And so you need to keep tuning that zone until you control your destiny, and then your intentional SEO is working. Because if Google is randomly picking off the page, you're doing random SEO at that point.
All of this ties into what we've been talking about with auto-generated content, site templates that are doing this or that, and people not really fully coming back in and optimizing. If you leave it up to chance, most of the time you're screwed down the line, is what it comes down to.
Yeah, and likewise, avoid using similar description text that's already ranking. Google hates it when two search results look the same.
Yeah.
And they will punish you hard if you end up in that boat.
What do you think about human.txt? I actually laughed because I thought it was a joke, and then I looked and there is a human.txt, and it said it's taking an initiative. Have you ever used it or heard of it? Or
I haven't used it. What is it?
It says it's an initiative for knowing the people behind a website. It's a text file that contains information about the different people who have contributed to building the website. I have never used it. I've never heard of it before today.
I think that it's the type of thing that Google would like to check for.
Yeah.
We have seen in the past that trust
Author.
signals like a contact page, contact information, hours of operation, those types of things that kind of validate you as a real business.
I will put one up on a website. I will throw it into robots.txt and the sitemap, and I'll tell you, I'll just see if the bots are even crawling it. My question is, are the bots even crawling it? That's my first question.
Yeah. So it's I don't know that Google's using it, but it is the type of thing that Google likes to use. So I could see it being a thing down the road if it isn't already.
But they already did authorship too, which
it worked great, but got exploited heavily. And that's the thing about trust is if you're doing exploits, trust is the exploit.
Yeah, big time.
So hopefully it's a system we can use. I would like.
Yeah, I'm going to take a look. I think maybe you guys should too. Then I didn't know it was there. Thanks, Adam.
So another volatility problem we can diagnose is cannibalization, and there are a couple types of cannibalization that occur, and I'm going to talk about both. This first one is cannibalization via multiple host names. So what we're seeing here is multiple versions of the exact same page that are competing with each other in search. In this case, Google is competing a www version of the URL with a www.less version of the URL.
Well, there might be a why they say to handle that, right?
And if you look at it, one has an average rank of 36 and the other has an average rank of 39.4. The page isn't changing. We're pulling this up at, within a minute, and one ranks better than the other. Why? Heck if I know, but which one do I want to have win? The one that ranks better.
Well, let's do something like this. I wonder if people in the audience, what do you start thinking of how just by seeing that, what does that spark in your head? What should you pay attention to when you're doing certain things to not break it? So start thinking like that. First thing I start thinking of is I need to look at my link profile. That's one of them, but I'm going to just stay with that. I don't want to go down that path, but I want people thinking how the tool can help you in your campaign. If you know this is happening, you obviously can see that www version will perform better. Well, let's get that freaking non-dub out, and hopefully your link profile isn't skewed to the other version because we see one working better.
I fixed this problem in about 4 hours.
What'd you do?
I went to the website and I was consistent with the URL. I was inconsistent prior. I was using both forms throughout the website. Yeah. So I went and fixed that everywhere it occurred. I set a canonical tag to the one that ranked better. And then I forced the issue with HT Access saying that no matter which version they come in on, send them to the one that ranks better. And within 4 hours, Google had chosen the higher ranking one as the winner. So I moved all of this traffic up to this ranking.
That's the beauty of being dynamic in the right places. Being able and monitoring data like this. What's up, Chase? Monitoring data like this and coupling it with simple scripts to know what the current, what is performing the best, and making sure that your website is scripted to deliver that to those bots and everybody else so that you're not getting into cloaking issues if you don't want to be that way. There are very beneficial things that can come from this kind of data that can be completely automated in your CMS.
So yeah, I was surprised by how fast you can fix this type of cannibalization. And so it was a quick win. It took me 20 minutes of poking around with the page and the server config, and then 4 hours later, I was in the better spot.
What would be a beautiful test is to point some solid links at a site and then change it and fix it with the navigation. I'd like to see how the navigation and how the site structure itself outweighs the external, the incoming external paths. It would be very interesting, actually. So thanks. I'll go on.
So the other form of cannibalization is when you have two different pages that are competing with each other for the same term. So we can see in the time sharing that one of them appears 15% of the time and the other one appears 85% of the time. The website is represented in 100% of searches, but between two different URLs. Sometimes this could be two or more. Google Books is the most cannibalized site I've ever seen. I've seen this go to 100 different URLs because of Google Books cannibalization.
Amazon gets cannibalized quite a bit as well in those SERPs, man. It's crazy. Where I've been, it's nuts what's going on with some of those listings, bro.
Yep. And so what we see is most of the time we have a page ranking at number 10, but then some of the time we're being cannibalized down to number 37. And so that's not good. So we would want to solve that. And when we look at these two URLs, they have the ellipsis and the report, but when you hover them, you get the full URLs. We could see what they did here. They made two pages that almost exactly target the same keyword.
So Ted, does this mean that we don't have to just give people the blanket answer of if there's an update, just wait at least 2 weeks and then look again? Now we can actually kind of diagnose things when things get somewhat volatile?
Oh yeah, I run the volatility tool every day on my important keywords, like what's going on, why did it move?
Yeah.
Because it's not just that it moved, it's why did it move? Was it a lucky test that'll be gone tomorrow, or am I solidly in that new spot? And here, you know, we have some choices to make, and possibly even hard choices. In this case, I don't think it's a hard choice because one clearly sucks. One is clearly
one is I'm the 37 and Brad's the 10. This is usually what happens in conversation.
So I would canonicalize one to the other. I would redirect one to the other. I might even prune one of them. I might even detune or retune one of them to take a related term instead of the exact same term. And, you know, it turns out like the keyword in this one was watermelon tourmaline pendant. The one that contained the exact match is the one that ranked well. So just want to point that out there.
Go figure. Keywords, dude? What?
Yep. So again, you know, this is something that's easy to fix. If you turn this poor ranking one into a redirect to this new one, I bet it fixes in 4 hours like the other problem.
I would actually absolutely. It's beautiful too because I just think about my wife's Amazon products and like the advantage that you can have knowing this and having data if you are publishing product on third-party platforms and you understand the way their platform works. This is super powerful data. We should probably just shut it off and sell an ebook.
Well, I definitely wouldn't want to get into the Google Books play. That cannibalization is terrible. I think if you're using Google Books for SEO, it's still viable for entity plays, but in terms of getting organic traffic because of Google Books cannibalization.
Don't use that platform. Well, so then there's the whole market for everyone that's building lists and doing like SERP pushes or using Money Robot or SE Nuke or whatever, or their own software to actually now start looking at this data when they're running their spam campaigns and actually tailoring their lists to sites that are not having these types of issues. Because what's happening is you got everyone building these keywords, the same keywords on the same platforms, and they're just creating tons and tons and tons of cannibalization on the platform itself. So now the question becomes, where do I find the best platforms to handle that? Maybe they're new, maybe they're not, maybe there is something in the search, but it might be a good idea if that's the way you're building links to start analyzing the subdomains of those types of platforms, your 2.0s, and see what's most effective, what's going to actually have the most traffic if you do use that platform. There's a lot of usage for this kind of data. So I hope it starts to make sense to people out there why you would want to see this on an ongoing basis.
And so another thing that happens is there are these tie scores that happen. So the average rank in Google is close enough that these two pages will just kind of flip-flop every time you run the search. And we see that in the data. They just keep flip-flopping every time we run. And so in testing, we call that minute random variance, because what we think is happening is when you conduct a keyword search, Google gives every search result a tiny amount of random ranking score. And so when things have tie scores, which is pretty common, that tiny amount of random ranking score fairly breaks the ties. So you could have a block of 5 or 6 sites that all have the same score, and that tiny random number they add fairly shuffles it. So some of the time you're on top.
Well, and that gives them segmented data over time for split tests, basically. And they've written a lot on how they take random segments and they come back at random times to take a look at performance for websites with users in internal search. So this makes a lot of sense, dude. Yeah.
And so when you see you're in one of those tie score groups, it's actually an opportunity you can act on, because in general, tiny amounts of on-page tuning for keyword relevance is how you break the tie. So if you're in a group of 2 or more websites that are randomly shuffling together, then you could do a little bit of SEO and all of a sudden you're at the top of that little pack.
So would you suggest in that case that you identify those situations and then optimize and beat that URL itself rather than looking at everything else in the SERP, correct?
Yeah, it's a quick win. It's something that you could do a little bit of SEO for, and all of a sudden you're up a spot or more. And so those are opportunities to take a little step easily and cost effectively. And again, it's when your average rankings are too close and you see this type of flip-flopping in the chart.
That's actually a really good opportunity, and it goes to show it's something you can use for if you're doing client work and people have been stuck there for a while. This might even be a sales process for some of you agencies out there. Someone's been stuck in a position for a while and they don't realize anything like this is going on. And if you see that kind of volatility, you see that flip-flopping going on, you have a quick win potentially to move them up a position that they haven't moved for a long ass time. We actually did some of this recently, slightly different, not same methodology or not the same data collection tool, but it does work to stair step up the SERPs in a lot of cases. Because I don't know how, I don't want to get into it, but I've seen certain things trigger what seems to be similar to this, if not this. And then once it triggers, then you can actually take the positioning. But it gets more strategic, I think, than people want to. It's just my weird brain looking at it in that way. But there's a lot of value here in understanding and knowing who is your direct competitor at that time when you're doing those tunings and optimizations.
Yeah, and sometimes there are weak rankings. So I mentioned before, there are weak rankings and there are really strong rankings. So this ranking here is incredibly weak. They appear in 10% of searches for the keyword. Now, when they appear, they're solidly a number 7. And it turns out in this case, it's a pseudo cannibalization because they have a different page that's in 100% of the time. But if we assume
they're getting 110%.
Yeah, so 10% of the time they have 2 links in the search results. But if we imagine for a minute that this is some other page, some other website, and we find that our website is just in there 10% of the time, this ranking is incredibly weak at number 7. And the thing about it is that we could do SEO on this page and turn this into 100% of the time. And what's so amazing about that is effectively a 10x on the organic traffic coming from Google to this page. You can 10x the traffic to this page with on-page SEO and not even move it from position 7. You will take it from number 7 all the way over to number 7 and 10x.
You did a lot of SEO for a lot of movement, right? But you didn't move, but you got traffic, right?
Yeah, and if you're not watching both, you're missing half your bragging rights.
Does this explain for people somewhat why they'll have visibility in the 70s and 80s, but still have search traffic on queries to some extent?
Yeah, because
one of the reasons
you can do things on your page that expand your keyword reach and just explode your traffic. You could do things on page that get you to appear for search for, more percentage of the time. And so this number 7 sucks. And the way you typically fix it is you do a lot more on page. The reason it generally has this time sharing is it hasn't earned its spot. Yep. Google is trying it out because it thinks it might perform, but it doesn't quite stand on its own ranking score. And so if you fix those relevancy issues, very likely this percentage is going to go sharply up.
It's interesting because I think the general market, I know people aren't digging in as deep as you like to go, and I do dig deep rabbit holes myself, but people are catching on. They're realizing, okay, this topic spam thing, phased based optimization, like we talked about at the beginning with like lorem ipsum or just topical paraphrase or spun content just to get visibility can turn into these weak rankings that you can then take in another phase and turn into a solid 100% ranking. And it's what I do with expired or auction domains. Is this right here with restoration and letting the profile rebuild and then coming in and tweaking and tuning to take over SERP.
Yeah, when I see this, it means your page is in the qualifier round, but you're not actually in the contest. And so you need to fix the relevancy issue that's not allowing you to qualify to play the game.
That's very interesting. Thank you for going over those. Those are freaking big wins in my opinion.
All right, let me pull up the software, and if we have time, I can run.
Yeah, it's quick enough. We can run something right now, man. You know what? Should we look at the Apple or the MacBook Pro query, or do you have something in mind?
I'm open.
I don't. Yeah. If someone in the audience has an idea while it's coming up, let us know. Have you noticed?
Adam is asking about indexation. Mike, I've been bitching to you about a page that I did every trick that I've
There's an update that's rolling right now and has been, but that's going to be site specific.
Yeah.
So, and they are a little slower in some markets right now.
They seem slower than I want them to be, but it is a new site that we're working on. Not a new site, but new to us site that we're working on.
A site that's ugly and has a lot of issues.
Yes.
So what's the keyword?
Let's just go with MacBook Pro.
MacBook, all one word.
Yeah, MacBook is one word because I know that that query changes quite a bit with how many pages Mac is able to push in, and it's a very interesting query when it comes to cannibalization and intent, and people have a lot of opinion there. So it'll be interesting to see what we get out of that.
So it's conducting the 10 searches. I had it set to 10 samples. And the cool thing about this technology is the higher the sample rate we set, the more it tunes out Google's volatility, the more it tells a consistent story about what's going on with the pages. And so we test these things out to sometimes, 50, 60 samples.
Have you seen that? Do you think a 15-minute check, if for automation is too long of a check period, too long to wait, or if you were going to do this on say you integrate it into a CMS and you want to make some decisions based on data? Do you think 15-minute, a collection every 15 minutes is enough, or should it be faster than that? What are your thoughts, man?
I think it depends on what you're trying to diagnose. Mm-hmm. I've done 200 searches over the course of 30 minutes, so I could animate it to see the volatility, how volatility changes over time. Yeah. And the software has features for doing that. So here's the MacBook Pro. We did it in the English US market, time-stamped, 10 samples. We can see the sample data. And so we can see the volatility in the chart. Let me see if I can make that a little bigger.
I like the time sharing right there between the 13 and 14 and 16 inches. That's kind of interesting.
And so is there a particular website we're looking for?
Well, no, it's actually the Apple. Their Serp changes so much. I wanted to see their time sharing and how it was delivering here, because I think what you'll see as we go in, we'll see 15-inch come into there's a couple. And I don't think I'm not sure if they have a 15, but we will start to see the Apple.com. They will deliver anywhere from 4 URLs to like 1. And so I'm very interested in what happens in this query. I watch it quite a bit. It's one of my favorite queries in the world.
So they have 3 URLs at a time in the search results, and the number 2 spot is cannibalizing between 2 options half the time. And so that's interesting. If they prefer one over the other because it makes a lot more revenue, they might be tempted to fix
Well, and it's changed actually, because I think they made a decision and did something. I'm going to have to look back at data, but these types of queries I think are very just interesting to see what Google does with the authority in the space. But then also, if we look down, I'm trying to remember which the other domain. I think it was Costco that kept delivering multiple URLs. But I am not.
30% of the time they're getting 2 for Costco. So they have one that's always there and one that's sometimes there.
Have you played around and looked at if they can tune that up to get a higher percentage for 2 URLs in the search?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
You can get multiple URLs to 100%. But when you do that, it usually means that there's a lot of quality issues for the website's ranking. When we look at things like right here, we see that there's a tie. We have this purple bold coloring for those tie group conditions. So their average rank is very close and they're flip-flopping. So there's a tie opportunity that occurred. And then as you get down here, you see that the time sharing goes off the chart. So it's all terrible time sharing. So I'd say, if you're trying to rank for this term, you probably stand a good chance of coming in at where that time sharing comes in heavily.
And where it starts. And then, so when we have those ties like we just looked at there, like for people in the audience, where would you prioritize? I would say I would go look on page first, and then I also have noticed in these kinds of situations that there's link wins, there's external wins there in a lot of cases where there are not as high competition and it's more of a content marketing type of situation. Have you looked at the difference there? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, all those components combine to form your overall ranking score. So you can solve these with off-page as well. In general, though, I find it's just faster and easier to do it with on-page if you can. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes it's an off-page game.
Yeah, I think it depends on where you are in the process and how far and how long it's been and the site's growth, or the page's growth, I should say. So,
hey, Mike, you want me to hop off and hop on to the NFG webinar?
Yeah, you do that, bro. Yeah, and I'll be right there.
All right, cool.
All right, so this is part of the cannibalization report. Note that it's books.google.com. Look how many URLs for this keyword they have cannibalizing each other.
Oh, that's interesting.
So if one of those is your book, all these other ones are stealing your glory, which is why this platform sucks.
That's crazy. Everyone out there that is asking, SEOvolatility.com, right, Ted? Is it?
Correct. All one word.
SEOvolatility.com, one word. I've got a webinar that's coming up right now. I want to keep you on. Did you want to say anything else before we end or anything? Or did you have anything you wanted to drop them out to them? Or I do think that it's worth going over and checking out what's going on. That he's charging too little for it, but that's his decision. So it's good data. It really is. Freaking interesting.
The price might change later this year. So keep keep that in mind, but I'm not going to change it in a hurry. Check it out. It's more of a technical tool. It helps you price out work. It helps you cover your ass. It helps you solve these types of volatility issues.
If you're stuck in a position on page 1 as well, or 2, it might be worth looking for any of those quick wins where you're actually just displaying. I would start looking for who's kind of holding you back. Thanks, dude. Thanks, Adam. Ted, thank you so much for coming today, man. I appreciate you just jumping on spur of the moment. Ted did not plan to be here. Craig was not feeling great. He wanted to sit and cry at home. So I asked Ted maybe an hour and a half before this show, and he came together and threw some slides together and jumped on. So thanks a lot. I really appreciate it, man.
No problem. Really, and get well soon, Craig. Sorry you're.
Yeah, Craig, feel better, man. All right. Thank you guys. You guys have a good one. Remember,